Okay, hello everyone. I hope you are hearing me. Uh, I hope we don't have any technical issues at the moment. So if you don't hear me, if you don't see me or something, please shout out in the chat section of YouTube or Zoom of this Zoom session, and let me know if you're experiencing some issue. Okay, so let's start, guys. First of all, thank you very much again for all of you to join us in this Porto.Vue event. It's the 7th meetup and the 4th one as a remote event. Okay, we actually don't do this event for a while. So the last time we did was in July. So we stopped for some summer holidays, and we were expecting to come back in September. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find attendees, not attendees, but speakers on time, so we could do the September meetup. So we decided to postpone it for October. Okay, but I'm pretty sure we will have two amazing speakers today, and you will enjoy a lot the topics that you are going to talk after this short introduction or introductory presentation. So going forward, what is, for those that are new to this event, what is Porto.Vue event? Porto.Vue event is a common effort to create a community around people who love and have interest in working with Vue. Okay. The main purpose of this community is to share knowledge, challenges, and experiences between all the members in the community, and raise the collective knowledge that we have. Okay. These meetups usually happen every month with different hosts, different locations, and different speakers. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 issues, we weren't able to change locations, so we moved to full remote events, and also we weren't able to do it every month, but we tried to get it as close as possible to this time frame. So for this reason, we are looking for speakers. We already have we had a lot and very interesting ones from a lot of different companies, different experience, even different countries. Okay, so with a lot of different knowledges, seniors, juniors, mid-levels, experienced developers. So don't be afraid to come to us and volunteer to become a speaker in the next in one of the next events. We still have a lot of topics that we can talk about, and we didn't talk in the previous events. So be more than welcome to get in contact with us. We will help you building your presentation. We will help you changing or choosing a topic. Okay, and we will. I think it will be a very good experience for anyone who wants to join. If you want to get in touch with us, please. You have 4 main channels. You have our Meetup page. You have our Twitter account, Slack, and email. Okay. So without taking more time from you guys, let me just present our 2 speakers for today. We have Adam Silva from Skeeled. He's going to talk about Storybook and how he works with it and with Vue. And we have Rui Saraiva afterwards. We will have Rui Saraiva, front-end developer at Pixelmatters. We will talk about the recently launched Vue 3 and give you some news about what's coming for this new version of Vue. So pretty good talks, very interesting talks that I believe all of you guys will get satisfied and happy by the end of the event. If you have any questions, please add those questions on the YouTube chat or in Zoom chats, or in the Q&A session. We will, after every presentation, we will give you 10 minutes for Q&A. We will also let you talk with us if you are in the Zoom conference. You'll be able to unmute and make the question to the speaker itself and interact with him if you want. Okay. If you want in the other way, through the chat, just post the question. I will answer. I will make those questions to the speakers and get an answer from them after that. Okay. So without, I think I'm finished for today. So let's move on for the first presentation from Adam Silva. Adam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start. Good luck.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yes, let me just share my screen here. Okay, so yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen right now. Okay, so hello everyone. Hope you all have been having a nice week so far. My name is Adam, and I'm a software engineer at a company called Skeeled. Before we start, I would just like to thank Carlos and Fabio and everyone involved for organizing this meetup, and also for inviting me to come talk to you here today. Today, I'm going to be talking about something called Storybook. Like with all presentations where a tool is being presented, I'm going to start with what it is, its purpose, and how to do a very basic initial setup with Vue. I'm going to talk very briefly about the CDD methodology. Then I'm going to do a dive into some of the core parts of Storybook and how to extend its behavior. I'm also going to talk about publishing and composing a Storybook. And finally, I'm going to show you a live example of one which their team has made public. There are a couple of more examples on their website, but I chose theirs because it's the one that allows me to better show you some of the features I'm going to talk about. So, Storybook. Its main purpose is to develop UI components in isolation using one of multiple frameworks like React, Angular, Svelte, and of course, obviously, Vue.js. This is an open source tool, and they frequently update their GitHub. Currently, the project has around 54,000 stars in GitHub, placing it at around 56th place of all repositories, which I think is pretty impressive overall. Another purpose of Storybook, we can call it its secondary purpose, is that you can build your own component library. By building components in isolation, you're practically making it so that they can be used in any number of your projects. I'm sure a lot of you have worked on multiple projects, and maybe sometimes there are a couple of components that were reused between those projects. Using Storybook for those reusable components helps to manage and refactor them. Since the components are built in isolation, you can also easily create unit tests for them without having to worry about any external factors. Now, Airbnb, GitHub, Atlassian, and JetBrains. These are only some of the companies that take advantage of Storybook when developing their product. Some of these have their product used by tens of thousands of people, and some have their product used by millions of people. They use Storybook because it helps with developing components, either basic or complex, and to take into account each use case each component can have. Now, the concept of components has been around for quite some time and only made more popular due to the modern frameworks we use today. Some of you already may know this, but component-driven development, or CDD, is a popular methodology that's been around for some years. Its idea is basically to build entire UIs from the bottom up, meaning you start with basic components like a button, an avatar, or maybe an input. Then you start combining components for more complex use cases like forms or tables. After which, you start to assemble entire pages like a registration page, a home page, a settings page. And finally, you integrate those pages into your projects. Storybook itself was built around this methodology, meaning it's easy to start out building isolated components. So it's pretty easy to set up. Since this is a Vue meetup, you need to have any Vue project created with Vue.cli, for example. Then you can install it like any other package. They recommend using npx. After running the command npx sbunit in your Vue project, and after it finishes setting up, you just need to run the npm command run storybook, which will then start up and open Storybook automatically in your browser. Some examples come out of the box with the package to help you get started. After installing the package, when you next see your code editor, you're going to notice two new directories were created in your project. First is a directory called .storybook. There are two files in there, one called main.js and preview.js. These come with some default configurations for Storybook, and anything you want to or need to have customized is going into one of these two files. The main.js file has the main configuration for Storybook. It controls the behavior of the server, so whenever you make a change there, you need to restart the Storybook process. An example of what goes in this file, it can be a custom Webpack or Babel configuration. The preview.js file controls the way stories are rendered. Here you would add any CSS imports, any plugins you would need globally, or anything else that you would need configured for Vue on a global scope. In some future slides, I'll give you some more examples of what can exactly go in each of these files. The other directory that gets created is called stories. Yep. Stories is Storybook's definition of a component's rendered state. A component, let's say a list of items, for example, it can have multiple states. We can have an empty list of items, which has just a placeholder text saying it doesn't have any items, or we can have 10 items on that list. Each one of these two scenarios represents a state, and so a story is created for each state. These have the file extensions of .stories.js. It's Storybook's default way to detect and read stories. These files can have any extension you want, as long as it's a JavaScript file. This is one of the examples of something that can be changed in the main.js file in the new .storybook directory. Although my personal recommendation is to leave that as it is, since it's already a pretty good way to identify the story files. Another thing that can be changed in the main.js file is the location of these stories. By default, they would go in the created stories directory, but you can make it so that they can go in another directory. It all depends on how you want to organize your project structure. One of the ways that I like to organize them is that each story lives in the same directory as the component it's related to. But again, this is just a personal preference of mine. Now, the way to write these stories is by using what is called the component story format, or CSF for short. The CSF is mainly divided in two parts, default and named exports. Default exports determine how one or multiple stories are listed by using the title property, and it's where we tell Storybook what's the component we want to tell stories about. Then, the named exports define each story itself. Everything inside the named exports is the same as when you're creating a component in Vue with the Options API. But no matter what the story, you're only going to need 2 or 3 properties. The first is components. You already know this one. We declare here the components we are going to use in this story. Then we have the template property, which is basically the HTML of what we want to show in our story. The third property is props. You already know this one, but I'll explain it better in a couple of slides to how it adjusts to Storybook. Like with normal JavaScript, we can only have one default export per file and multiple named exports, meaning we can have multiple stories for a single component inside one file. Here is an example of a simple story file where I want to show the My Button component. It's the most basic setup you can have for one story where you don't have to pass any properties to the component. Storybook allows us to join multiple stories together into one or several groups in the Storybook UI, allowing for a better organization and an easy way to look up components in the future since it has a native search bar. To do this, we just need to change the title property we define in the default export. So here, for example, we have the example dash custom elements dash button. Depending on how many directories we put in the title property, Storybook displays it differently. Since in our example, we have 3 directories in the title, the first one is like a group, the second one is a folder, and the third one is a collection of stories. The better this title property is used, the more organized your Storybook is going to be. Well, since each story represents a different state of a component, we need to be able to pass different values into each story so we can see the different states. That's where the props property comes in, and also something that Storybook calls args, or arguments. You're all familiar with the props property. It's how we pass data into a component. Together with the args property, that's how we pass data into each story. First, we need to declare our base component with the properties I explained before, with the components and the title. This will be used for every story in that file. Then for each story itself or each named export, we bind that base component and declare the args property or the arguments, and we tell each story what the values we want passed to it. So in the example, we have 2 stories, where in the first one, we're just passing a Boolean called primary and a string called label. In the second story, we only want to pass the label. Then, as it is normally done in Vue, it's up to the component to receive those values and treat them. Args has another useful passive feature, which I'll explain in a bit. Moving on to add-ons. With add-ons, we can extend Storybook's native UI and behavior. There are multiple first and third-party add-ons, and some of them even come out of the box with a Storybook installation. It's possible to deactivate one or even all of them in case you don't need or want them, and we can do that also in the main.js file in the created Storybook directory. If you want to add or customize any add-on, it's done in that file as well. I'm going to talk about 2 add-ons, which I found pretty useful for myself. The first one is called controls. With this add-on, we can dynamically interact with any component, like changing any values passed to the component as props, whether it be colors, arrays, objects, strings, or booleans. It will then change the component accordingly, and you can see it in real time what happens to it. This add-on comes out of the box. Like I said before, args plays an important part in using this add-on. When using args to pass properties to your stories, Storybook works out automatically each property's type and creates a control for it, like so. So here we have the Storybook's UI for the controls add-on. As you can see, we have 4 props being passed into this story: a color picker, a dropdown, a boolean, and a string. By changing the values in this UI, the component in the story gets updated at the same time, making it useful to test out different values that the component can have without having to change the code each time. Storybook works out automatically what each property's type is, but sometimes we don't want that, since JavaScript only has a couple of data types. Well, with something called arg types, we can define what each property is, and it has a couple of more types we can use. Anything we define here in arg types also gets passed to the story, and for that, we need to slightly change our base component definition to pass the arg types to the props property instead of args like it was before, like here in the example. By declaring the args property in the default export, we make sure that everything inside that all of those properties get passed to all of the stories in that file, meaning we don't have to repeat every property for every story we have in that file. Now, I said before that sometimes we don't want Storybook to automatically detect the property type. Well, for example, here we have a property called background color, and by giving it a control of color, which is a type of control native to this add-on, Storybook will then put in a native color picker for that property. If we didn't have this specifically declared, Storybook would just assume it's a string and would show a text field for that property in the controls UI. Another add-on I have found to be especially useful is Viewports. Storybook itself allows us to create components in isolation, and with this add-on, we can more easily view our components in different screen sizes and different resolutions without having to use the browser's DevTools device mode. This add-on comes with some default screen resolutions, but it's completely customizable, and this customization is done in the preview file of the Storybook directory because it affects the way how the stories are rendered. During the live showcase, I'll show you an example of this add-on as well. Then there are decorators. This is a pretty simple concept. I found decorators to be pretty handy. These are basically wrappers around our stories, so we don't need to change the components themselves. Decorators can be added on a specific story, on all the stories of a component, or on a global scope. One example where I used decorators in the past was on a global level, where I wanted to wrap all my components with a simple div that had some styles which would center everything and give it a background color. Starting from the top example, this is how to declare a decorator for a specific story. No matter what scope you are defining a decorator, the template needs to have a story tag, which is how Storybook knows where your story will go inside that decorator. Then in the second example, we are declaring the decorator in the default export, which will then be applied to all the stories in that file. Lastly, we are declaring a global decorator. To do this, we do it in the preview file. Now, maybe you'll come to a point where you'll want to publish your storybook, either for the world to see, like some companies do. They make their storybooks public, or maybe you just want to publish it so you don't have to go to the trouble of setting up your local dev environment every time you want to see your stories. One of the most useful use cases for this in companies is that it allows developers, designers, and project managers to check if the UI looks good. Well, Storybook comes with a built-in command to do this called build storybook. After running the command, you can deploy to a server of your choosing, and it becomes immediately available. They also provide a simple package, if you want, called Storybook Deployer, which does all the work in deploying your project, your storybook, to a static hosting service like GitHub Pages or an Amazon S3. Lastly, they have also created a tool called Chromatic, which deploys your storybook to their service, where it helps to do visual testing. It has a feedback system for each story or in each component, so your project managers and the developers can comment between themselves for each story, and it helps to detect visual regressions. It also integrates easily with popular continuous integration tools like Travis or Jenkins. So if you have tests and the tests fail, they will just stop there. They need to be approved in Chromatic, and then only then will it be deployed through the CI tool. Now, imagine if you have different projects, each with its own storybook. We can even go a step further and say that each of those projects is using a different language. Opening each storybook individually can get a bit tiring and confusing. It's possible to merge multiple storybooks into one, so you can see everything in one place. This allows us to have everything separated nicely in each project, and at the same time, be able to navigate all of our stories in one place. We define this in the main file with each storybook you want to merge into your own as a different reference. You can do this for online published storybooks or a local one. When referencing a local one, if that code base gets changed, then the hot module reload will kick in and update your storybook as well in real time. Now, to finish this presentation off, I'm just going to do a live showcase. See, well, okay. So this is one of the many examples on their website, and it's also one they created for themselves. It's their design system, as they call it. So here on the sidebar to the left, we have a native search bar. It's pretty easy to understand. It helps us filter out what we want to search for. And here at the bottom, we have the list of stories. Here inside, this is the group of stories that I told you about, and here is each individual story itself. Now, on the right side here, the screen is divided into. The top part is what they call the canvas. It's where the stories get rendered into a preview iframe. The lower part is for controlling some of the add-ons. So here, let's go here to Avatar Basic. To show you an example of the controls add-on, here we have their avatar component. I talked before about the controls add-on. Here we can control anything, any kind of controller prop that is being passed to the component, and we'll see it updating in real time. So if I change the is loading here to true, you can see here it updates in real time, and you can see the icon loading. Or we can change the username, which they take the first letter of whatever I put here. We can also put in here a URL for an image, and it will also appear here. Or we can change the size of the avatar. This is one of those control types that I was talking about that needs to go in archetypes because it has a control type of dropdown. And as you know, JavaScript doesn't have that type, so it needs to be used together with archetypes. They also have a couple of more add-ons here, like the story add-on, which just shows the story code. They, for example, they did this in React since Storybook itself is built on top of React. They also have the accessibility add-on, which helps to see which tests are passing for accessibility, which are incomplete or any violations. Now, here in code snippets single, here we have a pretty large component. It's pretty big. And if we wanted to see this normally in a mobile or tablet view, we would just press F12, like everybody knows, and go to the device mode of the browser. Well, I talked to you before about the Viewports add-on, and here I'm going to show you an example of this. Up top, we have a couple of shortcuts, and this one here controls the viewport we want. They only have 3, but you can customize how many viewports you want and their resolutions. Here on the right, we can see each resolution as we change it, and then we can reset it. You can also apply a grid to the component, to the canvas as you see fit, or you can even change the colors, one of the color schemes, color filters that you can apply, or you can also change the backgrounds. Each one of these is an add-on, and you can customize this as much as you want, or even remove them if you want to. No. Well, and that's it for the presentation. I hope you liked it. It was pretty short, but these are all the main topics you are going to want to know if and when you start developing your own storybook. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Okay, Adam, thank you very much for your great presentation. So do we have any questions? I'm looking both to YouTube's chat and Zoom chat, and actually there is one question. Okay, Tadeu, if you're on the Zoom, you can actually talk. Just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, so hi. I just have a question regarding this. In my case, I've been using Vuetify for the components, but sometimes I have to wrap some special rules and make them my components. So I have my component which uses Vuetify to be able to render what I want. How would Storybook deal with an external library to render the components?
Yeah, that's a good question. I also use Vuetify.
Yeah, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, you're not. I'm listening.
Oh.
Or maybe I am.
No, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear it too, Adam.
Tadeu, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Adam.
Yes, we can.
Tadeu is muted. Okay, Tadeu.
Okay, yeah. So to answer his question, to use Vuetify in Storybook, you would just add it normally like you would in a Vue project in the preview file of the new Storybook directory that was created. since that preview file is what controls what gets rendered, there you would just import Viewtify as normal. If you have a preset, you can also import it there. You would just then extend it to Vue with Vue use Viewtify. And then to wrap everything with the Viewtify component like VApp or vmain, you would just create a decorator on the preview file, and the template would be something like VApp, vmain. Inside you would have the story tag, and then close everything. And with that, every story that you create would be wrapped inside those two components.
Yes, I think that was a good answer. Yeah, we actually we also use at Hyperspeak we use Element UI. Okay, so it's similar to Viewtify, and yeah. We use it with storybooks as well, and without the problem.
Nice, great.
I also have a question. So there was a few scenarios here. I mean, all those scenarios are simple components, okay, units, small units, yeah. Okay. But sometimes there is the need or sometimes it's handy to put in storybooks a full, I wouldn't say a full screen, but something with more than one component, okay? Yeah. 3, 4, 5 components. There is a few use case scenarios for that. And in those case scenarios, it's pretty common to make a call to a REST API, okay? Yeah. How do you handle that? So in storybooks, we don't want to make a call to I think it's desirable to not make a call to any REST API. Can you mock it, or do you usually do that? Do you have any kind of scenario that you could share with us?
Well, I don't mock any kind of API calls. I just do it as is. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure it's possible to mock them, possibly in the preview file, where you do everything like when you mock a just unit test or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how it's done, but I'm pretty sure it's possible.
Okay, great. I think we don't have any more question. Am I right? No? Oh, there is another question actually. So the question is, I have a project in React that has the storybook, but I'm migrating to Vue.js. Are there different configurations, or is it the same for both frameworks?
The base configurations are the same, since the preview file and the main.js file are simple JavaScript. Those would remain the same as far as I know. Then the only thing you would just need to change is the structure, the content of the stories themselves, to migrate them from React to Vue.
Yeah. Okay, and here today we're saying for storybooks purpose, maybe it would be interesting to just mock the API requests. No, yeah, we actually sometimes mock it. Okay.
Yeah, ideally that would be great. I mean, if you can pass the data inside the component so it doesn't have to make the API call, that would be great. But yeah, if you can mock them externally, that would be even better.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, we found out that it wasn't that easy to make those mocks with storybooks. But we made a workaround. But it's not. I think actually it's not the main purpose of storybooks to deal with that kind of things. It's very edge case scenarios. But yeah. Just wondering if you had some experience around it. Okay, great. So I think we are done with this presentation. So Adam, thank you very much for this presentation. It was great. I think everybody here it's giving you great feedback for the presentation and the content of it. And some people even saying there was a lot of new features in storybooks they didn't know about, even though they use it every day.
Yeah, the version 6 came out quite a while ago, and it came with pretty new features.
Yeah. I actually didn't have the chance to give a hand on it as well. So thank you very much for sharing this knowledge.
You're welcome.
And I hope to see you again with another topic in the future Vue.js events. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So Moving on. Rui, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so now we have Rui Saraiva, front-end developers at Pixelmatters. He's going to present about Vue 3. So Rui, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, I think you are ready. So, first things first. Thank you, Fabio and Carlos, for inviting me to give this talk. I really appreciate it. It's actually my first talk, even in English, so wish me luck. So my topic today, I will be talking a little bit about the composition API. This is a new API that was released alongside the Vue version 3. So my name is Rui Saraiva. I'm a front-end developer at Pixelmatters. You can find me at GitHub, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It's all the same nickname. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. I will talk a little bit about why even this composition API was created in the first place, some of the limitations of Vue 2 that are the main reasons of this new composition API. Then we'll go through a couple of code reuse patterns available on Vue version 2 and also on Vue version 3. Last but not least, we will go through all the basics of the composition API. So let's get started. So first question, why even bother creating a new API? You already have the options API on V2. It's still available on version 3, but there was a couple of things that the options API struggle with when we start to scale our applications. So creating Vue components allow us to extract repeatable parts of the interface coupled with its functionality into a reusable piece of code. That's our main reason to create components. So basically this alone can get applications pretty far in terms of maintainability and flexibility. However, this alone might not be enough. There was cases, especially when the applications get really big, hundreds of components. Dealing with applications that big can be really challenging, and keeping everything shared and reusable, it's especially important for maintainability on a project. Okay, so a couple of limitations of Vue 2 are the readability as components grow. So as components grow, they become less readable and therefore less maintainable. As we reuse pieces of code across components, each of these reuse patterns has its own drawbacks. We'll talk about these patterns right after this. Also, one big thing, in my opinion, is Vue 2 has limited support for TypeScript. There is ways to write it with TypeScript, but they are not completely optimal. So that's another thing. On first topic, readability as components grow. So here's a simple example of a Vue component written in Vue 2 with the composition with the options API. Sorry. So we have components, props, things that we are used to use on our Vue projects. We just return repositories, filters, search query. Then we have a couple of computed properties, some watchers, a couple of methods, and then our mounted lifecycle. So as you can see, we have several responsibilities on this component. And first things first, so getting a repository from a presumably external API for that username and refreshing it whenever the user changes. So we have a method to fetch data. We have a prop with the user. If the user changes, the prop user changes its value, the trigger to fetch the data will run again. So we also have the logic to search for repositories using a search query string, which is a computed value. And last but not least, filtering in repositories with a filters object. So a single component have 3 different responsibilities. So it's time to break this up. So as we are talking about multiple responsibilities, I color coded the different ones. So red for the repository's data, green for filters, and purple or purple-ish for the search feature. So we start to have our functionalities all separated on different sections of the component. So this reduces the maintainability and readability of the component itself. So that's one of the main drawbacks of the options API. And yeah, this last piece of the component. So how can we improve this? So there are 3 patterns to reuse code in Vue 2. Those are mix-ins, mix-in factories, and scoped slots. We can start with mix-ins. So we can organize code by feature. We are prone to conflict. So if we use multiple mix-ins that have the same properties on data, for example, they will conflict itself. So unclear relationships, mix-ins are abstract, so they are not namespaced or something similar. So their relationships can be unclear, and they are not easily reusable. So we can abstract code, but it's specific to one functionality, so it can't be easily reused for other purposes. Next, we have mixing factories, and these are functions that return a customized version of a mixin. So they are easily reusable because they use a mixin, but its values are namespaced, so there are no collision with the naming convention. Clear relationships, so because they are namespaced, they have a little bit more context about its responsibility, but there are a couple of drawbacks as well. So weak namespacing, we need to be very explicit and strict about namespacing, so we don't have issues for all the team that is working on a particular project. We still have to look inside each mixin to see what properties it exposes. So that's why we have here implicit property additions. The reason we get some benefits from being namespaced, but then to access the properties inside, we still need to use always that same namespace. And mixin factories can't be dynamically generated. So that's why we have here no instance at runtime. Last one, scoped slots. So they solve the mixins problems, but they increase the indentation. They have a lot of configuration. So these two coupled together decreases the readability of the same components. Some of the configuration ends up on the template, which ideally should just contain what we want to render. And the exposed properties are only available on the template. So we don't have the properties available on the options API. having multiple components means that it's less performant. So since we are passing the data through the scoped slots, we need to nest components, and multiple components will have a less performance score if a fewer components were used. So we end up on this list. On Vue 3, we have 4 reuse patterns of code. We still have the same ones from Vue 2, so there is no need to migrate everything to the composition API in order to use Vue 3. So it's full backwards compatibility. We can migrate each component at a time. So what's new is the composition functions, which are a function that use the composition API functions as well. So just to example to compare, React has the React hooks. Vue 3 now has composition functions that uses the composition API. So it's a most straightforward comparison. So composition functions, this solution uses less code. There is no wrappers, no extra components, just functions. It also builds on your existing JavaScript skills. So since we are already familiar with functions in JavaScript, so no new syntax to learn or something like that. It's much more flexible than mixins and scoped slots, since they are just functions. And IntelliSense, autocomplete, and typings are also most likely to already work on our code editing. That's why we have tooling friendly. There is no wrappers, nothing like that, so it's super straightforward. Okay, let's start with the basics of this new composition API. We'll cover the setup, the refs, the lifecycle hooks, how we can react to changes, and also how we do computed properties. So the setup component option is a new option only available on Vue 3, or can also be used on Vue 2 if combined with the composition API plugin. So this new setup component option is executed before the component is created, once the props are resolved, and serves as the entry point for composition APIs. So now that we know the why, we can get to the how. To start working with the composition API, we first need a place when we can actually use it. So there's where we use the setup component option. So let's start here. Okay, we have a little bit more information. There's a couple of things that we need to understand with regards to the lifecycle hooks. So because the component is not yet created, when setup is executed, there is no this inside of setup option. We will see how we can handle these situations. With the exception of props, you won't be able to access any properties declared in the component. So local state, computed properties, methods. So basically, all options, all local state computed properties methods that are provided and used inside of options API will not be we will not be able to access inside of our setup component option. Setup option should be a function that accepts props and context. We'll see what those have inside. So props, you can already guess that it provides our props, component props, and context will provide us with a couple other properties will difference if we have less or more plugins already added to Vue, but as the Vue core already has emit, for example, the emit function inside of context. So instead of using this $emit to emit a new event to the parent component, we just use context.emit without the $sign, and we just do the same thing, pass the parameters, just like the $emit function. Everything that we return from the setup function will be exposed to the rest of our component, as well as to the component's templates. So properties that we return from setup, we can use on, methods, computed, and watchers available over the options API, but the opposite is not possible, like I mentioned on the previous slide. So here we have an example. So we just have our, I guess I can use my scroll for this. So we have our setup function here inside this next slide. Wait. Okay, so we have our setup function here that receives the props. We are just logging props here that will console log the user, since we have only one prop called user of type string. And this is just the minimal setup required to start working with the composition API setup function. So we need to return at least an empty object. So anything returned in here will be available for the rest of the component, like we mentioned. Let's see the next example. We have as an empty array and saved into the variable repositories, and we have a function that fetch our users repositories with the prop user provided. So this is just a normal fetch function, and then we return both properties variable and get repositories function as well. So if you return properties, will be exported to the template and the options API, and if you return functions, functions returned behave the same as methods as we would do over the options API as well. So next we have reactive variables with ref. So on previous example, we created the repositories just like an empty array without any wrapper or something like that. This will not update the templates, so it will render, if we do a loop on this repository array on our templates, it will not render anything because since this variable repository is not reactive, it will not trigger a new render lifecycle methods, and the template will not be updated. So to fix that, we use this new function on Vue3 called ref. So in Vue3 you can make any variable reactive anywhere with a new ref function. So ref takes the arguments and returns it wrapped within an object with a value property, which can then be used to access or mutate the value of the reactive variable. So this is the same if anyone has experience with the React hooks, the use state and something like that. Not use state, use ref, where we have to, in order to use the value, you need to access the dot value of this same variable. It's the same here. So wrapping values inside an object might seem unnecessary on this case, but it's required to keep the behavior unified across different data types in JavaScript. So that's because in JavaScript, primitive types like numbers or strings are passed by value and not by reference. So this ref will take care of everything and pass by reference in order to keep the reactivity provided by Vue3 running correctly. So here is a quick example of a reactive variable. So we just created a counter. Instead of assigning the variable counter to a simple number, we just wrapped the number with the ref function. And then we have, if you print counter, it will output an object with the value and the number as the value for the value property. For using the value inside the counter, we need to access via .value, the .value property, to increment it or change it in any way possible. We do counter.value ++, for example, to increment, and we can console log it right after, and we'll have the value updated. To use this on our previous example, the only thing that was changed is this line. So const repositories equal to now is a ref of an empty array instead of a simple array without the reactivity wrapped. So this way, everything is the same. This way, this variable repositories will be reactive, and after this fetch user repositories function finished running, we set the value. So repositories.value equal to the response of this function, the return value, and after this value changes, we'll trigger a new render cycle because of the reactivity injected by this ref function, and all the places that uses this repositories function will be updated accordingly. So next, we'll talk about our lifecycle looks. So since everything is inside of the setup function, how do we handle lifecycle looks like mounted, watch, and something like that? So the composition API has several new functions that help us with that. Lifecycle looks on composition API have the same name as for the options API, but they are prefixed with on. For example, the mounted lifecycle look that we use on the options API inside of the the composition API, sorry, we use the on-mounted function provided by Vue. Here is an example. So we just imported the on-mounted from Vue, and let's see if I can move this. Cool. So we imported on-mounted from Vue, and then we use it on our setup. So everything that is composition API, we already mentioned that we use inside of this function. And we just run on-mounted, and we pass the reference, the reactive reference that we need to execute on the on-mounted lifecycle. So on-mounted, it will execute this callback, which is the get user repositories. So basically, when the component mounts, we'll fetch the user repositories and then update the templates accordingly. So next step, how do we react to changes on variables created with the composition API? So similar to a watcher inside the component using the watch option, we can do the same using watch function imported from Vue. It accepts 3 arguments. So the first argument is the reactive reference that we want to watch. So any ref that we created before or any computed that we'll see next. A callback has a second parameter. So when the reactive reference changes, this callback will be executed. And thirdly, the third parameter, we have a couple of options that you can provide, like we do on the options API, like immediate and stuff like that. So here's a quick example. We import, we import watch from Vue, and we have our counter, which is a ref. So here is our reactive reference. And then we just watch on counter. So when counter changes, here we don't need to provide counter.value. So Vue will detect this, that is a reactive reference, and use the dot value automatically. So which is nice. And here we have our callback with a new value, old value, just like we would use the watch handler on the options API as well. And we are just doing a console log. New counter value is just new value. Okay. So this is the equivalent on the options API. So here is composition API. I know it's not inside of setup function, but you can figure this out. And here is just the counter needs to be on data, and then we watch the counter. It's the same thing. Okay, now let's talk about computed properties. So similar to ref and watch, computed properties can also be created outside of a Vue component with the computed function imported from Vue. Okay, that's a good point. So here, as you can see on this example from watch, we are not inside of the setup function, and this works as expected. So if we just import this on any other file that we want, and we just paste this code, it will work as expected. So we just need it inside of the setup function if we need any value, for example, the counter, to be returned to the templates. Okay, so the computed function returns a read-only reactive reference to the output of the getter-like callback passed as the first arguments to computed. So here's an example. Here we have the counter variable again, with just a ref with a number inside, starting at 0. And then we have a computed. So we just imported the, oh my God. We just imported the computed function from Vue, and then we call it, and we pass a callback, a getter function, as the first parameter. So it's just an arrow function that returns the counter value multiplied by 2. So then if we increment the original counter, so counter.value plus plus, it will increment this from 0 to 1. And then if we console log the two counters values, we'll get 1 for the original counter and 2 for the computed property that is multiplying the original one by 2. Okay, I think that's it for now. I guess I'll be open to answer any questions possible.
Okay, Rui, thank you very much for your presentation. So guys, anybody has a question? No, not yet. Okay. First question, have you done a migration from V2 to V3 and how hard it is?
I started working on a small project migration. So the first thing is we obviously install the new version of Vue 3, right? And then there's a couple of differences when it comes to set up the Vue app. So on Vue 2, we use the global Vue instance, and we just add the global components and mount the Vue instance as well. And the way Vue 3 works it has a couple of functions that are exported from the Vue package. So one is create app. So instead of new Vue instance and then calling the mount method, we have the create app, and we pass our options to the create instance, and then we call mount on that method output, the method return. So that's the only things that are kind of breaking changes. So we need to explicitly update them in order to, or for our application to work. But other than that, like I mentioned, the composition API is fully optional. So everything we have on our options API will work just as expected. And yeah, nothing much from there. So one thing to keep in mind is when starting to migrate, or we need to take care, or at least search for all the plugins and stuff like that that we use on our projects. So for now, Vue 3 core is ready, but there is still work being done currently for the E11 compatibility layer and stuff like that. So those are the main things, the main road blocking things to look for, I guess.
Okay. Great. There is another question, but I think it was related. So telling about migration into V3, it can be all good. What's the biggest headache so far? I think you already answered that. I'm not sure if you want to add something more. Yeah, that's it. And there is another question here. I didn't know Pixelmatters was using Vue. Can you talk about how much you all work with it there? Also, any open source from Pixelmatters?
Yeah, so we use Vue.js on a couple of projects. So we have React as well, but the biggest slice is definitely Vue on our project code base. So at least 30 to 40% is Vue based. So that's a plus one on that. Regarding the open source, we have a couple of configuration packages for now. We are working on creating a couple more things for the community. But for now, we only have configuration packages for ESLint, Breather, and stuff like that.
Okay, great. I have also one question. Do you know if there is, I'm sure there is, but there is any migration guide from V2 for V3?
Yes, there is. So the current documentation is being updated mostly weekly. So, like I said, the core is ready. So they are continuing to work on the first party libraries like Vue Router and Vue DevTools, Vuex. So the main focus of the Vue core team is on those libraries, and the migration guide will be updated as the Vue build compatible with the IE11 gets done as well. So the documentation is available on vue3.vue.js.org. So it's a subdomain. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. And talking about Vue Router and Vuex, how ready or the most used packages in the community, how ready are they for the Vue 3?
So okay, that's a good question. Right now, I checked on the weekend, and seems like every single library already has a couple of betas already released. So, like I said, they are working together to do they call it a combined release or combo release.
Okay.
So after the Evan Yu presented the Vue 3, he shared a little bit about the next couple of months. So they are planning a combined release at the end of the year, which will be released both Vue 3, the core that we already have, Vue 3 with the compatibility layer for IE11, Vue Router with 4, which supports Vue version 3, Vuex as well, Vuex version 4, and Vue DevTools, everything working together. So they will do a scheduled release at the end of the year. So everything will be released most likely in January, possibly. So that's the reason that we have the Vue.js code, the repo on GitHub, for example. The Vue.js 3 code base is not on the Vue.js 2 repo. It's a separate repository. So when they will decide it's the right time to do the combined release, they will move to the original repo and release all the correct versions and the documentation as well.
Okay, great. There is another question here, which is, do you think V3 is already stable enough to start migration from V2? Or would you recommend to wait a little bit more?
So that depends on the project, really. So like I mentioned, if you have a project with that uses Vue Router and or Vuex, it's better to wait a little bit more for the combined release of all of these community projects. But either if not, if you only have a completely isolated project that just uses Vue on top of our templates, that's completely fine to start working. That's the main reason the Vue 3 core was released. So people can work with that, report issues as they encounter, if any, and keep the ball rolling in between the time the new Vue build compatible with E11 comes out. Also, there will be version 2.7 that will be released at the same time as this combined release. So this version 2.7 will have compatibility warnings to help migrate an app. So if you enable a flag on the Vue instance, it will warn you that, okay, you may want to update this kind of methods or this kind of approach in order to better be a better migration process to the new Vue 3, basically. So that's one of the reasons that maybe you can wait a little bit for version 2.7, mostly if you have a lot of legacy code. That's my opinion.
Okay, great. So I think we are done. Okay, so I think all questions were answered. Again, thank you again, Rui. Thank you again, Adam, for your presentations. For the rest of the community, thank you also for you guys to be here and join us in this event. Let me ask you again. So if you want to join us as a speaker for the next event, please talk with us through our channels and wait for another event in the space of 1 month, a month and a half, probably in the end of November, beginning of December. We will make another event. And a reminder, I just remember this now, actually in December, it will be the first year of Porto.Vue community. So we will make 1 year in December. So maybe we can try to think of something special to celebrate the birth of this community. So hope to see you in the next event. Thank you guys, and see you next time. Are we done? Carlos?